Welcome back to the deep dive. You know the deal here. We cut through all that noise and go deep on the big ideas. Stuff that can really change how you see things.
That's right, no time wasted. And today we're diving deep into strategy number 30 from Robert Greene's The 33 Strategies of War. It's called Penetrate Their Minds, the Communication Strategy.
Yeah, this one's all about getting inside people's heads, figuring out how to shape what they believe and how they see the world. Less about brute force, more about that subtle kind of control.
It's pretty fascinating, actually. When you can influence someone's beliefs, you pretty much guarantee their actions will follow suit. It's like having allies who basically govern themselves based on what you've convinced them of.
Exactly. That's powerful stuff, right?
Hmm.
So in this deep dive, we're going to explore how winning isn't always about what you do out in the open. It's about getting into the minds of your opponents, controlling the story, subtly shaping their perceptions, and ultimately influencing what they believe to be true.
And it's important to remember what Greene emphasizes. This whole idea of narratives and beliefs, it's not just some big concept for wars and stuff. It's the foundation of all interactions, from global negotiations all the way down to those little disagreements we have every day.
Absolutely. So understanding this, it's like a key to navigating pretty much any situation where you want to have some influence.
For sure.
Okay, so let's get into a real example to kind of illustrate this, a really powerful example from history. We're talking about Adolf Hitler. Now, we're looking at this strictly through the lens of communication strategy, okay? How this strategy was used, not endorsing any of his actions or ideologies, obviously.
Right, of course. The point the source makes is that in the years leading up to World War II, Hitler wasn't just focused on building up his military. He was busy creating a whole system of belief for the German people. What's interesting here is how a simple message, even if it's a harmful one, can become incredibly powerful when you repeat it over and over and make a big spectacle of it.
Yeah, think about those massive rallies he held, the carefully crafted speeches, the constant propaganda. It wasn't just about scaring people. It was about creating a whole new reality, convincing millions of Germans that they were destined for greatness and that his way was the right way.
And by the time the war actually started, a huge chunk of the German population, they weren't just ready for it, they were totally invested in it. They believed in what he was doing. Their minds had been, well, penetrated, I guess is the word. Their beliefs had been molded. It really shows you the power of shaping how a whole group of people thinks.
It's a scary thought, actually, but it's important to understand. So for our listeners thinking about their own lives and work, what are some of the benefits of this kind of, mental influence?
Well, Greene talks about total influence as being one of the main benefits. If you can truly get someone to believe in something, they'll basically act in a way that helps you achieve your goals, almost like they're doing it on autopilot. You don't have to constantly tell them what to do.
Right. It's like you plant the seed and it grows into the action you wanted. Pretty efficient.
Exactly. And another big advantage is weakening your opponents from the inside out. By subtly planting seeds of doubt in their minds, you can chip away at their confidence. They start second-guessing themselves, and that can be enough to make them crumble before you even have to directly confront them.
Well, that's so clever. It's like a mind game.
Right. And then the third big benefit Greene talks about is long-term control. You see, physical dominance, that takes a lot of effort and resources to maintain. But mental influence, that can stick around for a long time. It can shape people's attitudes and behaviors for years, even generations. Think about those deeply held cultural beliefs that get passed down through families. That's long-term influence in action.
That makes a lot of sense. So we've got the theory down, but how does this actually play out in the real world outside of these historical examples? Like, what can our listeners relate to?
Oh, there are tons of examples. Just look at those super successful brands out there. They're not just selling products, they're selling a whole identity, a lifestyle. They've gotten inside the consumer's head, made them feel like they need this product to be cool or successful or whatever it is.
I totally get that. We all have those brands we're drawn to, even if we don't really know why.
Exactly. And then think about leadership, which is something I'm sure a lot of our listeners are interested in.
Right. Leadership, whether it's at work or in their personal lives.
Yeah. The truly effective leaders, they're masters of communication. They know how to use language to tell a story, to connect with people on an emotional level, and to shape public opinion.
So it's not just about being in charge, it's about knowing how to influence people.
Right. And this stuff, it's not just for big-time leaders. It's relevant to your everyday interactions, too. The ability to persuade someone, to explain your ideas in a way that resonates with them, to understand and influence how people are feeling. These are all practical ways you can, well, penetrate minds, if you will. And that can lead to better relationships, more success at work, all that good stuff.
Okay, so let's talk about a modern example that really brings this to life. Apple. Greene uses them as a prime example of this strategy in action, and I think it's super relevant to our listeners.
Yeah, Apple is a fascinating case study. I mean, they've built this crazy loyal customer base, and it's not just because their products are good, it's because they've created this whole feeling, this lifestyle around their brand. The message they send is that if you own an Apple product, you're innovative, you're creative, you're part of something special.
And people buy into it, right? They really believe that owning an iPhone or a MacBook makes them part of something bigger, something aspirational.
For sure. And that psychological influence is so strong that people will stick with Apple even when there are cheaper or even better products out there. They've been sold on the story, the image that Apple has carefully built.
It's amazing how much perception matters, right? If you can shape how people see something, they'll choose you, even if it costs them more, or even if logic says they should go with something else. So for our listeners, if they want to apply this in their own lives, how do they start? How do they start penetrating minds?
Greene breaks it down into a few key skills. First, you've got to master the art of persuasion. That means learning how to communicate in a way that influences people. Second, you need to be able to tell a good story. People connect with stories way more than they do with just facts and figures. And third, you've got to understand how emotions work, how to tap into people's feelings and use that to get your message across.
So it's not just about being logical and having the facts. It's about being able to connect with people on a deeper level.
Absolutely.
And what happens if you completely ignore this whole idea of mental influence? What's the downside?
Well, Greene is pretty clear about that. If you don't make an effort to shape the narrative, the story that people believe about you or your goals, someone else will do it for you. And their story might not be very flattering. You basically leave yourself open to being manipulated.
Right. You lose control of your own image. Okay, so let's move on to another historical figure who was really good at this stuff. We're talking about Julius Caesar. He wasn't just a military leader. He was a master of shaping perception, wasn't he?
Yeah, the source points out that Caesar was very strategic about how he presented himself to the public. He didn't just win battles, he made sure everyone knew about it. He formed alliances with the right people. And he cultivated this image of himself as the savior of Rome, the guy who's going to fix all their problems. He was telling a story before he even took action.
So by the time his enemies tried to take him down, the people were already on his side. They believed in him.
Exactly. He had basically won the battle for their minds before the real fighting even began. And that made it a lot easier for him to win the actual physical and political battles that came later.
Pretty brilliant, really. Okay, so here's a really important warning from Greene that our listeners need to hear. This kind of mental influence, it can't be built on lies.
That's a crucial point. While it's okay to be strategic about how you present things, you can't just make stuff up. If people find out you've been lying, they'll turn on you, and it'll be hard to earn their trust back. It's about finding that balance between telling the truth and telling a compelling story.
Right. A story that people will believe and get behind.
Yeah.
So a good example of what not to do is WeWork. Remember them.
Oh, yeah. That's a classic cautionary tale.
So the founder, he had this amazing vision, right? This idea of a revolutionary new way to work and live, all about community and innovation. Sounded pretty cool.
Yeah, and investors ate it up. They poured billions of dollars into the company because they were so captivated by the story.
But here's the thing. The underlying business model, it just wasn't sustainable. It was all smoke and mirrors. The reality didn't match the hype.
And when that became clear, it all came crashing down. They lost a ton of money, and WeWork became this big example of what happens when you overpromise and underdeliver. The takeaway here is that you can definitely influence people with a good story, but that story has got to be based on something real if you want it to last.
Right, otherwise it's just a house of cards.
Exactly.
Okay, so for our listeners who want to put all this into practice, what are some practical tips from the source?
All right, well, Greene has a few suggestions. First, be very deliberate about how you present yourself. Don't let other people define you. Decide how you want to be perceived, and then actively work to cultivate that image. Think about your reputation, your online presence, all of that.
So be proactive about shaping your own narrative. Makes sense.
Yep. Second tip, focus on connecting with people on an emotional level. We've talked about this already, but it's so important. People are driven by their feelings, so craft your message in a way that speaks to their heart, not just their head. Figure out what they care about, what their values are, and use that to your advantage.
Emotions over logic. Got it. What else?
Third, come up with memorable symbols and messaging. Think about those catchy slogans or visual images that stick in people's minds. That's what branding is all about. You're creating these little mental shortcuts that make it easier for people to remember you and your message.
It's like planting little flags in their mind.
Sure.
Okay. What about when you're dealing with people who disagree with you or competitors? Any tips for that?
Yeah, there are ways to subtly weaken opposing ideas without getting into a big fight. Instead of directly attacking someone's argument, try to gently point out inconsistencies or ask thought-provoking questions that challenge their assumptions. It's a more subtle way to plant seeds of doubt.
Kind of like a mental judo move.
Exactly.
Mm.
And finally, be consistent with your message. Once you've figured out what you want to say, stick with it. Repeat it over and over again in different ways across different platforms. The more consistent you are, the more likely people are to believe you.
Repetition and consistency. Got it. Okay. Greene wraps up this strategy with one more modern example, Tesla. I'm sure most of our listeners are familiar with him.
Oh yeah, Tesla's a great example of how to build a brand around a powerful idea. They didn't just market themselves as an electric car company. They positioned themselves as part of this huge shift, this revolution against fossil fuels and pollution and all the old ways of doing things.
And Elon Musk has really played into that, right? He's constantly talking about the company's mission and how it's going to change the world.
Exactly. And that's what makes Tesla so appealing to a lot of people. They feel like they're not just buying a car, they're joining a movement, they're part of something bigger than themselves.
So it's not just about the product, it's about the belief system that comes with it.
Yeah, and that shared belief creates incredible loyalty. Tesla customers aren't just customers, they're advocates. They believe in the company and its mission, and they're willing to tell everyone about it.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this strategy, I think it's safe to say that real power isn't just about physical strength or money.
Totally agree. It's about shaping how other people think. The most successful people, whether they're trying to overcome a challenge or achieve a big goal, they understand that they need to influence how people perceive things, what they believe in, and how they feel.
So it's about winning those mental battles before the real fight even begins.
Exactly. Get inside their heads, and you've already got a huge advantage.
Okay, here's a final thought for our listeners to ponder. The next time you're facing a challenge or trying to achieve something big, don't just think about the practical steps you need to take. Think about how you can shape the narrative, the story that people believe about the situation. What perceptions can you influence? What beliefs can you instill? If you can do that, you'll find it much easier to get what you want.
I think that's a great takeaway. Really gets you thinking.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.